Hello, and welcome to Faith and Spirituality in a Time of Crisis. My name is Chris Fuller, and I'm the Chief Sponsorship and Mission Integration Officer at St. Joseph's College in Maine. This is a series of conversations with local faith leaders, as well as philosophers, theologians, and others around the country about how we are adapting spiritually during this time of the coronavirus. My guest with me today is Katie Payson, and Katie is the Dean of Students at the Chaplaincy Institute of Maine, or as it's also known, Chime. Katie, welcome to the conversation.
Thank you. It's really nice to be here and be a part of this.
That's great.
Looking forward to it.
Good. So, I introduced you as the Dean of Students at the Chaplaincy Institute of Maine. So can you tell our viewers a little bit about what is the Chaplaincy Institute, or what is Chime? What kind of services does it provide?
Yeah, that is great. Because the title is actually a little bit misleading sometimes, but Chime is a interfaith seminary. There are 13 of them actually throughout the country, and we're here in Maine, of course. And it is a 2-year program, sometimes a 3-year program, like I did it in 3 years, in which we educate and train really people to be of service in their communities. So our tagline is, we train interfaith leaders to serve with integrity, prophetic voice, and spiritual presence. Mm-hmm. So the classes happen primarily in person, but we're starting a new program this fall where some of the classes will be online. So it's kind of fun.
Okay, and what kinds of settings then do your graduates serve as chaplains?
Yeah, so they are all over the place. So some folks choose not to serve as chaplains, and instead they are serving as interfaith ministers in their communities. And those folks are often doing different kinds of rituals and celebrations. So they may do interfaith memorials or weddings or other kinds of small ceremonial things for people. For folks that do go into chaplaincy, we have people that are, working with Grace Street Ministries, which is, they work with the homeless here in Portland. We have people that are in various hospice and assisted living programs throughout mostly southern Maine, northern Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Seacoast area. We've had people work with Volunteers of America and still have a grad that's working there. We've had people in different school settings going into schools and working with kids and administrators in school settings. They're in a lot of different places. Those are the ones that come right to mind off the top of my head.
And how did you find your way to Chime?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when I came to Chime, I'm a clinical social worker, and I have a private practice here in Portland. And I was finding that a lot of my work with people was focused around certain questions around sort of meaning and purpose and value and self-worth. And I was finding myself really using a lot of beliefs and values that I've taken from my own tradition. I'm an Episcopalian. And as I started to do that, I found that I really wanted to explore more deeply what my faith is to me and what it means to me. And, I'd always had, I love the Episcopal Church. And I think like most people, or many people, I shouldn't say most, but, I also have some questions about some of the ways that some of their doctrine and some of the ways that they ran their services. And so I've always explored different traditions. So I decided to come to Chime because I wanted to do that more. I wanted to explore not just different denominations within Christianity, but just different faith traditions around the world, because I really was not very familiar with many of them. Mm-hmm. So in doing that, it was primarily for my own self-development, really trying to get clearer about what I believe and understand my own faith journey. And then I was hoping to be able to, from that place, just be better prepared for some of the questions that my clients were bringing to me in their private practice.
So, you mentioned the clients you work with. It speaks then to some kind of both understanding on your part that they were expressing a need to speak about things that we would call loosely spiritual, right? Not necessarily religious in terms of particular denominations or their doctrines or practices, but more broadly, we would call spiritual. And the reason I mention that is, Maine, depending on where you look, Maine is either the least religious or among the least religious states in the least religious part of the country. Yet it seems to me that Chime, by what it offers, which is not a specifically denominational approach, but more broad-based approach rooted in kind of a spiritual focus, it seems to me it's meeting a need that's still there. That is, we may not be a state where there are as many people going specifically to a church or adhering to a specific denomination, but there's still, correct me if I'm wrong, there still seems to be a need for some kind of exploration of what we would call the spiritual. Is that correct?
That is beautifully said. Yes, that's very correct. And I think of that really broadly speaking in two different parts. And one of that is our own experience of our own spiritual life. And some people are comfortable thinking about it in terms of the spiritual life or a faith life. And many people, especially I find in Maine, when I ask my clients, they really connect with the idea of connecting with something larger than themselves that provides a sense of meaning and comfort. And often there's a relationship with the outdoors, which makes sense. We live in a beautiful area, and it's a very spiritual area in many ways in terms of the natural world. And so there are a lot of folks like that, around here that have very, very deep, I think, spiritual connections with something larger than themselves. Mm-hmm. So that's one way that I think that Chime connects with people, is bring them further into that. Our first year is actually called the Year of Contemplation. Mm-hmm. And it's all about really exploring who you are and what do you believe and where does that come from? Where does that nudge you in your life? How does that impact how you're of service in the world? So that's that whole first year. The second year is called the Year of Service, and that relates a little bit to what I think of as another big piece of spirituality, which is really around community. And how are we in relationship with one another? How do we connect with one another? How do we support and love one another? And sometimes that's doing things for and with people. Sometimes that's just sitting with people and holding space. And sometimes it's just a place where you can really feel like these kinds of conversations are encouraged and supported. Who are we? And what's our purpose on this planet? And I think we believe every single person is uniquely worthy and loved, and every single person has a reason why they're here. Some purpose. So how do we connect people with each other and with that purpose?
Absolutely. And you mentioned you came at this from your own particular denomination, right? You were raised Episcopalian. You began to ask questions that led you down this path. And so I guess the question I would ask you is, what can those who are still committed to a denominational practice, as I am myself, I'm Catholic, but what can we learn from, what would, it's always the question of, what would you say to yourself then? That is, what have you learned through this journey that you would say are opportunities available to those of us in denominational settings who remain denominational, but still ask the same kinds of questions and may be willing to journey down those paths? What have you learned through that journey that you would offer to others of us in a similar kind of place?
Yeah, great question. So what I would say is that, first and foremost, I really do believe that we all have a relationship with God or the divine. And so I think whether you connect to that through your faith tradition, which is a wonderful way to do that, or not, through a formal faith tradition. We all have that. And so what I love about Chime, and what I think one of the biggest gifts is, that if we stand in that place of knowing, that place of truth, that you are a person who has a relationship with God or the divine that really helps you to lead your life in a way that has meaning. If we all stand from that place of knowing that about ourselves and someone else, then I think we're in a great position to enter into conversation or dialogue, relationship, or just doing things in an open-hearted way. And I think we all have the capacity to do that. And I would say we all have the capacity to do that a little bit better. You know, I certainly can do it better than I do now. And I just hope as I live my life, I get a little bit better, a little bit better, a little bit better about being able to hold that, that place of deep regard for self and others, and our worth, and what we bring to the bigger world.
Mm-hmm. The advent of the coronavirus, its impact is widespread, right? And obviously among those have been among religious denominations of any kind. It doesn't matter what your denomination is, that a lot of adaptation to changing needs, changing circumstances. You have, many places, temples, synagogues, churches going to streaming worship services or Zoom services or drive-in services, all variation of things to try to maintain, social distancing. How has the coronavirus impacted Chime and its work?
Right. So that has happened on multiple levels. So the first thing is that we are a school, and our students meet face-to-face once a week for 3 hours. And so right off, we had to transition from those in-person meetings to Zoom meetings. So we were lucky because we were moving towards implementing a blended learning model for the fall. And that involves the weekly classes, people meeting via Zoom online. And then our weekend workshops, which we do once a month, people still coming together. All the students and staff come together once a month on Saturday, Sunday. So because we had been moving towards that, we were able to relatively easily transition our in-person classes to Zoom. So that was great. What was harder was that we had our weekend workshops for April and May, and now coming up, we have our senior projects and then our ordination in June. So transitioning all of those to online formats has been both a really creative and wonderful process, and there's a sense of sadness and loss. So that's one big thing, and that's involved lots of details, teaching teachers how to teach online and those kinds of things. But the other thing that's happened is there are all these other little parts of our program. And one is that our students lead a service once a month, an interfaith service. And so they have moved those online. And what has been remarkable to me is that we've actually had more participants in those services. And I think it's because it's more accessible. I'm not sure. It's been a little bit surprising. And we'll see if that continues. And then the same thing we do various open houses and kind of shorter workshops during the week where our alumni come in and they teach about a topic that's important to them. Like we had someone come in and do an open house around mandalas and what they mean to different faith traditions and how she uses them in her own spiritual practice. And then we had someone come in and talk about this forgiveness curriculum that he developed while he was a student, and that he's been bringing into middle schools in his area. And so those typically we would have, 5 to 8 people attend. Now we have between 30 and 40 people attend. So I don't really know what to make of that, and I don't know if that will continue. But it's making something that we offer accessible to more people who are really interested and curious at this time. So that's the second big piece. The third piece is been a little bit harder, and that is that the students who are doing internships have had to adapt to providing care, often from a distance. And so we've had to work with them and with the places where they're doing their internships, like the Barron Center. We have 2 students at the Barron Center. And the chaplain who's there that's supervising them, the 2 students, has really had to work with them to continue to help them learn about how to be an effective chaplain. And that's moved to an online format. And so we support, those things as well. And I think that's really been hard. I think missing the opportunity to learn, with people, in their facilities is harder. But we're doing it.
Good. And you mentioned that, obviously the adaptations that relative to class gatherings or even worship and some of the surprising things that have come as a result of that. Has this experience also shaped the curriculum in any way? That is, when I was in theology school and I had friends that were getting degrees in ministry, how to do ministry during a pandemic was not one of the things that they were being trained for. So has this experience, have you had to adapt also as far as curriculum goes in terms of your students working with them and doing ministry in a time of crisis like this or emergency like this?
Yeah, so that's happened primarily with the students through their work with their internship supervisors that are helping them do that. But we also, I don't know if you've heard of the Chaplaincy Innovation Lab. Are you familiar with them? So they're a fairly young, couple-year-old organization out of Brandeis, and they are they're really looking at chaplaincy and its role in our world, and the different ways that people are trained in chaplaincy. They do a lot of different things, and one of which is that they've been providing a lot of resources. They just yesterday released a new ebook on working with people through this grief process. So we pass that along to our students and alumni and make sure that they have access to those resources. But other than that, it's more talking with students as things come up and helping them really be tuned into what this time can look like, and particularly how grief and loss looks so different for different people. And there's a lot of complexity to that, right? There's how that looks for someone who may have lost a job is different for someone who's lost a family member versus someone who's, looks like things are all okay. They're working from home and maybe their kids are home, but they're still feeling a lot of uncertainty and loss. So helping our students really appreciate the breadth of that and how to be present with that, I guess would be where we focus.
So it's interesting you mentioned grief, because grief would be, I would imagine, a standard, part of the curriculum for any chaplaincy training, wherever it might be. Has it become a little bit more present at the moment because of all these different factors going on? Like you said, you have everything from job loss to losing family members. Some of those losses are, I lost my parent, I lost my sibling, my spouse, and I could not be there for it because I cannot be in the hospital for it. So you have this whole spectrum of grief, all at the same time, colliding all at the same time. So has it kind of centered grief in a way that may not normally be the case in kind of standard training?
I don't know that it's centered it anymore, because it is a part of our training and we have quite a big part of our curriculum that's on that. But I think what it's done is it has expanded it. So it's still central, and it has been central, but it's really expanded people's understanding of what it can look like. And even, we actually have a student who was going to do a wedding for a family member. right? And that there was a lot of grief in that needing to be transitioned, actually to, they did a very creative thing, but, you know, it was all from a distance, and it wasn't, you know, what was anticipated and what was expected. So I think, so I would say it's not any more central, because it's always been a pretty significant part of our curriculum, but it's gotten more complex, or the awareness of it has, the awareness of how complex it is has deepened for people.
Certainly, I would not, I mean, again, previous to all this, grief would more often than not probably be associated with a tragedy, the loss of a loved one. But even this conversation has helped me think the grief of unmet expectations, like you said, a wedding, a significant event, you know, graduation. My two sons graduated from college this year. It was online, you know, there's a certain kind of grief for them, a certain kind of grief for us as parents as well, in terms of 4 years of work. So yes, I think, you know, that notion of what constitutes grief perhaps is becoming a little broader in that regard, given the moment that we find ourselves in. So.
Yes, right. Yeah.
So you know, we've all had to adapt quickly technologically also to this, right? Those of us who have, like St. Joseph's College, we have teaching that had to continue. We moved online almost overnight, as many colleges did. You had to move to online over very quickly. You said train your faculty how to use these resources. Now that you've kind of gotten through that part of it and done that quick adaptation, is there anything that's come out of this experience where you're thinking, oh, I hadn't thought of how technology might work in this way? So once we're through this and we get back to whatever we say normal looks like after this, maybe we should be thinking about technology in this way. So have you been thinking about ways about using technology perhaps you hadn't thought of before all this happened?
Yeah, that is a great question. We were just talking about that this morning, as a matter of fact. So I think I mentioned earlier that some of the events that we have, our open houses, our student-led services, the online format has really allowed for a broader participation. And so the question that I will have going into the fall is that need still going to be there? You know, is this need there because, you know, people are really looking for ways to connect and to be with one another? Or will it still be there because, you know, Portland is close for some people, but certainly not for everybody. And would it make sense to have an online service once a month and then an in-person service once a month, to be able to accommodate, you know, the needs for folks that are farther away, as well as the folks that are closer to Portland? So I think that's a question just to be held for a few months and to see as we move ahead. But I'm game for it. I'm game for continuing to do that if it seems like people are still looking for that. So.
And I think that enthusiasm is a good note to end our conversation on. So Katie, thank you very much for joining me for this conversation. I wish you and Chime all the best. For those who are viewing this, they will see at the end of this video a link to Chime, as well as in the show notes, they can find a link to Chime. So if you are interested in what Chime does, but more so if you're interested in considering chaplaincy as an option, or the training of chaplaincy for an option, you can click on the link to Chime and you can get in contact and take it from there. So Katie, thank you again. And good luck both with your impending graduations coming up for Chime, and as you think about your work into the fall.
Chris, thank you. Really, thank you. Those were fun questions. I enjoyed them. And yeah, good luck to you too. And your